This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. NBA All-Star Weekend. We just went from All-Star to All-Sh. I can't believe it. It's just absolutely frenetic and crazy. And I'm just absolutely floored, speechless. Words can't contain myself. And no, I'm not talking about the ridiculous score between the East and Western All-Stars that happened just this past weekend. I think everybody has their eyes glued, their jaws dropped, and are just completely floored by what took place after NBA All-Star Night. And I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, former Dime Man contributor, writer for www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in the wee hours of the morning. How are you feeling right now, man?
I'm a little distracted. I can't say that I saw some of the things that are going to come out of All-Star Weekend coming, but it's a great time to be an NBA fan because there's movement. There's a lot big names on the move. I can't wait to jump into it, man. This is a really juicy morsel we're going to jump into, but salute to all fans and listeners of NBA Baseline. Huge trade to discuss right now. Dude.
Huge is not even the word to describe it, bro. It's interesting. Earlier tonight, right? People were throwing out these tweets about, interesting. Everybody got more than 13 minutes on the basketball court, but Boogie Cousins only got 2. And then you're saying to yourself, why is Boogie Cousins only getting 2 minutes on the basketball court? And then I just jokingly threw something out there saying, well, the call probably came down to Steve Kerr to sit him down because, he's probably getting moved, right? And little do we know that that could very well, instead of it being a conspiracy theory, that this actually is the truth. Because just as we're getting ready to lay our heads down, or for me, I'm in burning the midnight oil trying to get our podcast ready to go, we find out that Boogie Cousins gets dealt from the Sacramento Kings to the New Orleans Pelicans. Let me go ahead and break down the semantics regarding this trade. And I know my boy Shaw is going to weigh in on this. I mean, heavy. Like heavy D heavy. He's going to weigh in on this. But the reports are confirmed. Adrian Wojnarowski broke this, and now it's all across the wire. Boogie Cousins has been traded to the New Orleans Pelicans. He will be teaming up with Anthony Davis. The specifics of the trade: the Kings will acquire Buddy Hield, Tyreke Evans in his expiring contract, Langston Galloway, the Pelicans 2017 first round, and the Philadelphia 76ers 2017 second round pick in exchange for Cousins and Omri Caspi. All right, Shaw, it's yours. It's yours. The floor is yours, bro. I'm not gonna give you no intros. You just go all in on this.
There's so many angles to this story. We have the Sacramento Kings going back on their word about not wanting to trade a franchise player. Reports here from ESPN, Mark Steins, that Vlade Divac and company went to Cousins' house, met with his team, met with his agents just a little over a week ago and hashed everything out and said, you know what, we're not going to move you. Then came out to the media and said, we're not going to move Cousins. Now All-Star Weekend comes about, and what do? They move Cousins for basically a bag of chips. And it makes no sense considering all the available offers that should have been out there from all the teams that were reportedly interested, primarily looking at a team like Boston and Phoenix, who have the most assets, still have cap room and all of those things that could have made a move and a play for Boogie. Now, again, you don't know if Ainge or Ryan McDonough, were trying to play a hard ball and, trying to, lowball Vlade Divac in one way. And I can't see how you lowball him on the Cousins offers, but it seems like Dell Demps and New Orleans Pelicans were able to get it done. And that, to me, makes no sense. And this Sacramento organization continues to befuddle me, befuddle the NBA in terms of how they handle their organization and how they handle their superstars and what the future of this team is going to be. This is a franchise right now that is completely lost. And I don't care what anybody has to say. This is not a superstar haul. You know what I mean? The Nuggets got a lot back from the Knicks in terms of the draft picks and the players that were usable.
Yeah, at that time frame, Shaw, the New York Knicks had basically mortgaged their basketball team. And it was a decent basketball team. Collectively, they were a competitive basketball team, and they rolled the dice because they felt that the star power of Carmelo Anthony on New York Knicks in a New York Knicks uniform was more tractable, and that actually gave you the mindset of James Dolan and what he wanted to do with this franchise, that he was thinking more about the marketability of the brand of the New York Knicks than the actual winning and the formula of chemistry. This particular trade, Shaw, I don't know what to really make of it, because at the end of the day, you're rolling the dice on the idea that you probably were not confident in being able to market the idea that Boogie Cousins as a marquee player is going to be successful for the Sacramento Kings. But in what you're getting back, to not even say getting back Drew Holiday, to not even basically put yourselves in a position where people who are looking at this are saying, well, what were you doing the past 3-4 years when you had Boogie Cousins, right? You had this lottery pick. Like, it's just a bad look overall for the Sacramento Kings, no matter how you slice this. The stench of this is not going away, no matter how good this basketball team can be, because ultimately it's still going to come down to signing free agents. And I can't imagine anyone wanting to sign to play with the Sacramento Kings just simply because of how ownership handled this whole situation.
Right. And like I said, there's so many aspects to get into this. As we record, Rick Bucher's now coming in with some of the potential deals that didn't go through. Apparently, the Celtics were too focused on getting Jimmy Butler from the Chicago Bulls and didn't put enough into this Demarcus Cousins angle. Orlando could have had him, but didn't want to bring him into their chaotic situation. And Phoenix was trying to give Sacramento back Brandon Knight, and Sacramento did not want Brandon Knight back. So the Pelicans, with whatever you want to call this offer, ends up winning a Demarcus Cousins sweepstakes. Now, the one positive you can say here from Sacramento is, well, and it's not the fact that Willie Cauley-Stein is going to get a lot of minutes at the center position, is that this obviously makes them inherently worse. Now, they were fighting for a playoff spot in the Western Conference, but apparently their draft pick this year was going to be awarded to the Chicago Bulls if it fell out of the top 10. Now, granted, they're going to be a lot worse, so there should be no reason that their draft pick will not be in the top 10 now, and that way they'll get to keep their draft pick as well. So they'll get New Orleans picks, they'll get to keep their own pick, which should be now in the top 10. If New Orleans fails to make the playoffs as well, then that'll also end up being a lottery pick. And that's only positive I think you can take from the Sacramento team for the deal that they've made. But overall, on a whole, considering everything that is really out there in this NBA landscape, I just can't imagine that it's basically Buddy Hield and some picks that they got for Demarcus Cousins.
Now, here's the other thing, Shaw, and I think this is the interesting part. What do you now do with Rudy Gay? You cannot tell me that Rudy Gay wants to be a part of this. So what are they going to do with this situation? Because Gay is gone for the rest of this season. Now, I don't think that there's any kind of talks or anything that you really can say that's going to make this, a palatable situation for a veteran guy like him, who clearly was supposed to be one of the people on the trading block before they were even entertaining trying to trade Boogie Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very interesting because I think, as we have alluded to it many times, with Gay, he has a player option, but does Sacramento try to make a move now, move him out, figure out a way to get him off their books and find a team that'd be willing to take him on if they're trying to meet the minimum salary for this NBA season? And he makes a good chunk of change, so he can definitely help a team like Philadelphia or anybody that's trying to get to that minimum level. But they have the cards now, I guess, when it comes to Gay, because Gay, I can't imagine, would not opt in. But, we don't know. The other thing to think about now is obviously, going to the New Orleans side, is, wow, they have two bigs in an era where you're supposed to be playing small ball, right? And now they have two of the most dominant big men in the entire league. And another thing that just came across the wire, and again, when I tell you there's a million things to get into here, the New Orleans Pelicans are potentially looking at Josh Smith out of China to come in now and play the small forward position. What in the hell is going on in the NBA today?
And then I won't be surprised if they figure out a way to pull Jimmer Fredette and put him over in the 2 position as well, too. Didn't he just drop 73 points in the Chinese basketball league? Yeah, I'm just saying. I mean, look, we sit here and we chastise players and, we berate them, we criticize them. And these guys, listen, there's a method to the madness sometimes with some of these players. They go abroad, they come back when the situation is right. Remember, J.R. Smith did the same thing as well, too, right? He disappeared over internationally, played in the Chinese league, and found himself in a palatable situation. Palatable is my word for the night, for the week, or whatever you want to call it. He found himself in an ideal situation and was able to maximize that opportunity so that he could actually not only get paid, but also put himself out there as being one of the premier guards. Sometimes guys got to do that. Brandon Jennings has done it. And so I'm just saying is that Hey, listen, maybe Demps in his own desperate attempt, desperate play, desperate move to do something for the New Orleans Pelicans, this could be the greatest fit yet. He may have pulled the Danny Ainge of trades by making this move right now.
I would have to agree. I think, all these jokes going on Twitter as we speak. Demarcus Cousins does have to pack his bags. He's going to stay in New Orleans after the All-Star break and get to play along with the Brow. Disputing an earlier report about Anthony Davis and the Westbrook Brody hooking up at some point later on, in a few years, if you will. Dell Demps has effectively, in essence, saved his job with this type of move. They still going to have a lot of pulling to do with Cousins. He's still owed one more year on his deal, but they've taken him out of the Supermax that he would have been eligible for in Sacramento had he stayed. And, we had Leo Biaz on our show a couple of weeks ago from Cowbell Kingdom explaining the fact that Cousins definitely wanted to stay. He would have gotten a $200 million contract following next season. But now with his bird rights being transferred over to New Orleans, it doesn't work that way for him now. So yeah, he's still going to make a good amount of money, but he can't get that super max extension that he was looking for in Sac though.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and the hot button topic as we are discussing this right now, the breaking news about the New Orleans Pelicans getting Boogie Cousins from Sacramento. Hell of a deal, but clearly, as to my man has just pointed, it looks like this is all about Boogie Cousins to the Pelicans because there's really nothing worthwhile that the Sacramento Kings is picking up from this. And no disrespect to the guys that are going over there, but they're not going into an ideal situation. Shaw, I want to go ahead and focus my attention now regarding New Orleans Pelicans and what this does to their roster, because now you have an interesting situation. There's no question who's playing the five for the New Orleans Pelicans. But what do you do with Omer? What do you do with Alexis Ajinka? One of them has got to go. So I clearly have to think that Demps is not done wheeling and dealing before the trade deadline. Who do you think gets moved now?
Well, I think Ajinka is going to be out of there. He's unhappy. Ashik is still there, taking up a roster spot as well. And they've been trying to move Ajinka. He's been vocal about not wanting to be there, and he feels like he can contribute to any team out there. Even decent big man, got good size, can rebound, can shoot the jumper as well too. Not a great shot blocker, but can definitely help a team out there. And they were trying to move him, and they had conversations. Remember, we talked a couple weeks about Jahlil Okafor and Brook Lopez going there. The Pelicans have been searching for a five-man for a very long time. And Ajinka was going to be a part of any deal getting out. The fact that he's not a part of this deal going to Sacramento, and that's because they have 5,000 bigs on their roster already, is the main reason why Ajinka is probably either going to get bought out, or maybe they do a smaller deal to maybe acquire another wingman, which they definitely going to need some help at because they lose Buddy Hield, and again, they never really got to see his potential and see what he could really do there. They get to keep Drew Holiday, which is obviously huge, but now guys like Solomon Hill are going to step in there and be starting. And Solomon Hill is again, he did a nice job in Indiana a couple of years ago as a starter, but I just can't see him being a starter on a playoff bound team.
Now, I got to tell you something, Shaw. This is where the situation gets really interesting. In most situations, when you make a deal like this, you usually say this and you try to project yourself in believing that, this is going to be good for the team moving forward, meaning you're not necessarily worried about what happens to this team this year as much as you're worried about what it's going to take when this team actually gets itself together, get their legs underneath them, and get their chemistry built for next year. But even as we look at the standings, as we are obviously on NBA All-Star Weekend, the New Orleans Pelicans are only 2 games out of the 8th spot from the Denver Nuggets. And we can clearly already say, without a shadow of a doubt, no disrespect to our girl Ashley Douglas, who is firmly believing that move or maybe no move, the Denver Nuggets could probably keep that 8th position. That is in some serious jeopardy, and I speak lightly when I say that.
No, it is. I mean, and you would have to feel like New Orleans is the front runner now for that 8th seed. I think they're better off than Portland. They're better off than Denver, and they're definitely better than Dallas. I just don't see how, in essence, it doesn't work. But again, there's some questions. 2 dominant big men who need the ball in their hands. Cousins is a great passer, and I think playing alongside AD, you're really going to see some of that aspect of his game really flourish a little bit. Running pick and roll and pick and pop with Drew Holiday as well too. But again, there's a chance that maybe they can get in their way, get each other's way a little bit. And do they have enough defense on the perimeter now? Solomon Hill is a good defender. But do they have enough defense there and enough depth, if you will, to really be able to make a push? Because they're going to be very starter heavy, and those guys are going to play 35, 40 minutes a night easily. And luckily, I think, what are they, both 25 and 26-year-olds, something like that too. So they're young. They should be able to handle it. But they both have had some nagging injuries. We know AD's been, a little bit fragile. Cousins has definitely had some issues with his knee, his back, his ankles as well. Drew Holiday, same thing. But as long as they can stay healthy, this is probably definitely the best front court in the NBA right now with Demarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis.
New Orleans Pelicans right now, 21st in the league in points scored, 13th in the league in rebounding. I can safely say that they're probably going to move up a few notches in both of those areas just with this combination alone. All right, Shaw. I mean, what more can be said? We're obviously going to have to continue to keep our eyes peeled for any developments, and really the fallout, I think, is the most important thing that's going to take place. I mean, you had said this a little bit earlier before, that when you look at the teams that had an opportunity to make a play for Boogie Cousins and where the priorities may have lied and what the mindset is for a couple of teams that have playoff potential already in them, teams like the Boston Celtics and such, it really starts to make you wonder, what exactly is the end game here? And then when you see what may have taken place as far as the deal that has been finalized for this to happen, again, serious questions are going to be raised. And it may not necessarily be what Danny Ainge and guys like those do as much as it is what they didn't do that might jeopardize not only their roles, but also jeopardize the opportunity for these teams to continue to move forward, which the end game and end goal here is to win an NBA championship. All right, with that being said, guys, I really appreciate you all hanging with us as obviously we break down the developments of this deal. But clearly, this is still about the show. It's about the Baseline NBA podcast. And we still have a great show that still we have to discuss. And part of that is bringing on board a really great guest, someone who is really kind of up the game a little bit. He is now stepping to the fold. He's a great analyst, insider covering the NBA. Keith Smith, contributor for 16 Wins a Ring, also contributor for Real GM. He's going to be on board to help us break down some of the other developments that could possibly be opening up before the trade deadline. So we're going to have him on in a few moments. We pre-recorded it before all of this stuff broke loose. So we definitely want to bring him on board. And also he's going to help answer some of the questions that you gave to us, the fans, listeners of the Baseline NBA podcast, with reference to those developments. So we appreciate those who have submitted those questions. He's going to be on board to help us break that down. And then Shaw and I later on are going to also go through a couple of other developments that might take place, rumors that might get spread about with some key names that you may or may not know about that could be on the move. So great show ahead. Once again, the breaking news: Boogie Cousins moved to the New Orleans Pelicans. The New Orleans Pelicans now might have one of the most dominant front courts in the NBA, with AD and Boogie Cousins playing side by side. 2 games out of the 8th seed in the Western Conference. Is it enough for them to make the push and bully their way into this year's NBA playoff picture? Who knows? But we definitely know that right now things are getting shook up in the NOLA. Cal Lee Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. And we want to hear from you as well, too. What were your thoughts about this move? And what were your thoughts about the potential, the impact to the Kings and to the Pelicans alike? So we definitely got so much we're going to get into. This is definitely not going to be the end of it. But of course, we like to roll out the red carpet like we always do. Be sure to get at my man. Be sure to get at the show's Twitter handle, once again, at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM. Also available on Google Music, Microsoft TuneIn. So be sure to download any one of those platforms. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things on NBA. We're also being simulcasted and available through 16 Wins a Ring, one of the new websites that gives you great NBA content. Be sure to check that out. Also available as we simulcast through Freeman and Fox, the Sports Brothers, Monday through Friday. So be sure to check that out. You know how we do. You know how we like to roll. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down. Put the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And you asked for it. Actually, Shaw asked for it. And man, did we get it. We got so many great responses from people on their interests about this show. And even though it's All-Star weekend and everybody is kind of all glossy-eyed over seeing the superstars perform, we're in the background talking to our peoples, talking to our connects, trying to figure out a way to make sense of what might take place by the trade deadline. And so that's the purpose for the primer. And what better way for us to really get some insight and get you guys honed in on what may or may happen to your basketball team than our man Keith Smith. If you haven't seen him, I'm sure you will over the next few days, because he has been typing up a storm, giving us perspective on the NBA. You can always catch him. He's a contributor for Real GM. He's also on 16 Wins a Ring, rolling with our crew. Keith, thanks for joining us this week here and just really kind of breaking it all down. What's going to be really a hectic week of NBA trades and transactions possibilities, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited for this. This should be a lot of fun.
Oh, man. Fun ain't the word. And if not fun, then we might have to break out our pacemakers, man. All right, Keith. So the masses have spoken to us. They have sent it to us through tweets, through Facebook. And even if they damn well had to throw them on a pony and send them to me up here in New Jersey or my man Shaw down in Fort Lauderdale, the voices have spoken and they want to hear from you. So we need to know from you as we start going through our inquiries of the tweets and everything like that, what the status is going to be for some of these guys, as we get closer to the trade deadline. So we'll first start off with our guy, Chris Norby. He clearly was focused on the recent transgressions that happened with regards to a possible deal that was going to move Jahlil Okafor from the 76ers to the Portland Trailblazers. And in your article, which I encourage people to check out on Real GM, and I think also will be featured as well too through 16 Wins a Ring, where you indicate the buyers and sellers in each of the conferences. You have the Portland Trailblazers listed as a buyer for the trade deadline. What bigger way to indicate a buy if that move had actually made with Jahlil Okafor going to the Portland Trailblazers?
Yeah, they were. All reports say that they were very close to getting Jahlil Okafor. Let's touch on the Okafor situation as a whole, because there could be other questions on this. Very confusing situation, unlike anything I've ever seen. We've seen guys pulled before from lineups because trades were close, but we haven't seen them pulled and then sat for multiple days and then brought back into the lineup after that. Like, that's not something that happens. So it leads me to believe that things were really close. I have personally been told that they were very close with both the Pelicans and the Trailblazers. The Blazers offer, not real clear what that was and what that was bringing back. Portland, before making the trade that involved Yusuf Nurkic and Mason Plumlee, had 2 first-round picks. Now they have 3. So likely it was one of those first-round picks headed back to Philadelphia, plus some player to do some form of salary matching there on that side. So that's what had happened with Portland. All indications are that the Blazers still intend to push for the playoffs. They don't want to miss the playoffs this year. Their goal is to get in there and make that happen. So they're going to keep moving in that direction to see if they can get in there. So that's why I do have them listed as a buyer in the buyer-sellers piece for Real GM.
So, and again, I think when you touch on the Okafor situation, it is very, very confusing and just something that Philadelphia has a lot of explaining to do with that. And you talk about Okafor and Noel. So is that really where things are right now? Is Noel no longer going to be involved in the conversation? Is Okafor almost a surefire bet to go by Thursday's deadline?
Yeah, if you could bet on these things, maybe you can bet on these things. I don't know. That's not my realm.
Right.
But if you can, I would put all my money on Okafor being traded versus Noel. Philadelphia, what I've been told, is really they have come to really like Noel's fit along with Joel Embiid. They see Embiid, not that Embiid's a bad defender by any means, because he isn't, but Noel's pretty far advanced beyond where Embiid is. So they see those two as a really nice combination. You can have Embiid leading the way while you have sorry, I was just getting a text. I was getting distracted for a second there. You have Embiid leading the way offensively while Noel is really handling the business on the defensive end. And potentially, if Embiid continues to extend his range and show that three-point range, they might be able to play together a little bit because they're both athletic enough to go out and defend on the perimeter some. Where Okafor just doesn't really fit with either one of those two guys. He can't handle the perimeter defense, so it's really a challenge. So at this point, I think Okafor is the one who's going to go if one of the two does.
Keith Smith joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, our Trades Primer special, where we're breaking down all the possible acquisitions, rumors galore with regards to the teams that are happening up towards the NBA trade deadline. So, all right, let's go ahead and switch gears here. At Fluffy Sock Ninja, very, very enamored with the Detroit Pistons. I don't know whether or not I was more enamored, but I'm glad Fluffy Sock Ninja is. He's kind of curious about the value of Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson and what's going to happen to this Detroit Pistons team. Now, in your article, you have them listed as buyers as well, too, especially predicated off of the fact that this team has not lived up to their potential given what they've done last season getting into the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely Detroit is looking, they're still making that push. So I believe they're sitting in the 8th seed right now as we stand today, about a game or so ahead of the Bucks, couple up on Miami and Charlotte. So they do want to be in the playoffs. And so let's take them piece by piece. I'm going to talk about Reggie Jackson first because I think that's the more clear situation. Detroit has very much come to believe that they're just as good, if not better, with Ish Smith running the point for them.
And ain't that some ish? I'm sorry. Ain't that some ish, right?
Yeah, man, that comes out of nowhere, right? But the deal is that it's not that Ish Smith is a better player than Reggie Jackson. He's just simply a better fit for what Detroit did. They have a lot of other guys who need the ball. You've got Tobias Harris needs the ball. KCP needs the ball. You got to feed Drummond to get him going occasionally. Marcus Morris can do some things for you. So Smith is one of those point guards. He's a pass first, pass second, pass third point guard. He works very well in the pick and roll. He throws good lob passes, which is big with a guy like Drummond. So the belief is that he's the guy, that they do better with him. There's some thought that Reggie Jackson is, one, paid too much to take a bench role and would bristle at being put back into a bench role. He wanted out of Oklahoma City specifically to get out of that type of bench position. So the thought is if they can move Reggie Jackson and get assets in to help both this year and long term, that helps. The Pistons are also about to be an extremely expensive team because KCP's due for an extension, and they just gave one to Drummond. So that becomes another challenge. So that's a good segue into Drummond. The idea with Drummond is if they got a Godfather offer, from what I'm told, they'd move him. But for anything less, they're not really that interested. It's more one of those, hey, what would you give up kind of situations. Almost like I look at it as when you're playing like fantasy football and you dangle out there like this year, who'd be a good, like Ezekiel Elliott this year, like, hey, what would you give me for him? Just to see if somebody says something stupid like, here's 5 great starters. All right, done. You know, that sounds like where that's kind of trending towards. So it seems like Drummond's a guy who's going to be there long term, but if they got blown away, Detroit would move him.
Well, we're talking about a team that couldn't blow anybody away with an offer, and you mentioned them a little bit earlier, and that's the Boston Celtics. Lots of conversation, you know, through basketball Twitter, if you will, on what the Celtics are actually going to do, what they should do, what they even can do, and what Ainge is willing to give up. I think we here, you know, we follow the Celtics for a little bit, and we've been very concerned about Ainge maybe overvaluing some of his talent on his roster. At the same time, trying not to get Billy King'd in the same way, because I think it seems like GMs are trying to get some retribution for Billy King for what Danny Ainge did to him. But what can this team do? Our man O_Cambridge on Twitter wants to know what aspect do you think the Celtics will get involved in? Will it be something minor or something major?
I think it's probably going to be something minor. I think what we'll see them do is get something as along the lines of either a consistent bench scorer or a big man who can provide some defense and rebounding, probably off the bench or potentially in the starting 5. It could be both of those. They definitely have the assets to go make those happen. So those are a little bit of the things that they could do. I know that's not the most exciting thing in the world, right? Everybody wants to see the Celtics finally cash in and make that big superstar trade. But I continue to hold that superstar trades are very difficult to pull off. They involve a lot of moving pieces, often a massive package coming from the acquiring team. So that's why we don't see them too often. So I think there is a good chance that we're going to see the Celtics do something smaller, and then their big move will come either at the draft or this summer as free agency kicks off.
Keith Smith joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check out our man on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. Okay, so we've talked Celtics, we've talked Blazers, We've talked Pistons. All right, well, let's talk about Lakers. I mean, what would a show not be without the Los Angeles Lakers, right, Keith? I mean, clearly, like, we'd be missing the boat if we didn't have some kind of topic of conversation about the Los Angeles Lakers. And Dabs 106, he's really curious about the situations for the Lakers, for the Knicks, and he even threw a little side piece about Mario Hezonja. We won't do Mario just yet, but I really want to get your perspective about two historically great franchises in the Los Angeles Lakers and the New York Knicks. And it seems like over the last 3 years, the only time that we talk about these guys is not for basketball relevance, but for basketball drama. So at what particular point do we start seeing these two historic franchises who've been known to pull off savvy and really news-breaking trades? Where do you see these guys in the landscape between this year and towards the end of the season? Can they put themselves in the mix to make them relevant again for their franchises moving forward?
Let's just link them up and deal Melo to the Lakers, right? I mean, why not? I mean, there you go. That'd be big for everybody.
Like it.
Well, why not? No, that's not going to happen. Melo doesn't want to go there. That ship sailed a couple of years ago. But so the reality is, let's talk the Lakers first. There's a good chance that they're going to move Lou Williams. Lou Williams has been really good for them, but he doesn't fit. They don't need him. Bad teams don't need a sixth man who plays really well. It's a luxury that they don't need. So might as well move him and get whatever asset you can. And there's several teams that are interested in him as a bench scoring guard. And then beyond that, they've already started towards what we're going to expect from them for the rest of the year, which is having Brandon Ingram start and moving towards the young guys. And that's going to be what we see the rest of the year out of the Lakers, more as many minutes as the young guys can handle, and they'll push in that direction. And you know, this, as someone who grew up a diehard Celtics fan, it pains me to praise anything the Lakers do, but that's the right move. You know, it's the right thing for them to do is move towards the youth, because you just don't need it. You know, you don't need that extra guys there. They'd probably take something in trade for Nick Young if they could get it, so that'll be interesting. So we will see, you know, what happens with them. As for the Knicks, it really, I know everybody's, what's going to happen with Melo? What's going to happen with Melo? I continue to believe nothing this year. He's going to be on the Knicks, you know, come Thursday afternoon, and that's where he'll be for the remainder of this season. I do think this summer that'll come to a head, and it'll be that Melo moves on and gets pushed to a different team, and it's just easier over the summer for him because with that no trade clause, he has a lot more say and can work out where he wants to go and get his family settled and those kind of things.
I have a real quick follow-up question for you, Keith, regarding the scenario with Melo, because especially now after watching what Kristaps Porzingis just did, and I'm not predicating this on All-Star Weekend, but what I am predicating this on is you can clearly see the upside and the potential of Kristaps Porzingis, and I think somebody who I think can really embrace and play at a level that might endear the New York City Knickerbocker fan base. My question to you is, and is it just me? Maybe I'm just this dynamic with Melo and Kristaps, it's not there. So I mean, at what particular point, outside of the childishness that we see from the Knicks organization and management, at what point do you see them really sitting Melo down and kind of allowing him to see the big picture about what he needs to do for his career, and where this actually becomes a contradiction to what the growth opportunity and potential regarding Kristaps? I think at some particular point, the New York Knicks organization have to be thinking, we're going to lose Kristaps if we continue to allow this to manifest itself now throughout, you know, the rest of this year and beyond.
Yeah, no, you're spot on with that. The Knicks it's Kristaps' team. The Knicks have already moved in that direction mostly. You know, they're not going to just bench Melo or anything like that. That's not going to happen. But really at this point, it's, you know, all right, we're going to move on with Kristaps if we can find a place for Melo. And really, it's exactly what you said. Sit down in the room, talk it out, figure out a destination for this guy where he wants to go, and then go make that happen. You know, I beat up on Melo too, but it's not like he's a worthless player, has no value. You know, he just, you know, maybe doesn't have the superstar value some want him to have. But, you know, move in that direction, get that trade done, and move on with Kristaps Porzingis as the face of the franchise. One other quick thing I want to touch on with the Knicks before we move off them. The two guys that seem most likely to be moved off of this year's team would be Brandon Jennings expiring contract, backup point guard, doesn't have a ton of value to the Knicks for the remainder of this year. Doesn't seem fully happy there either. He could definitely be moved. And then the other guy is Kyle O'Quinn. There's a lot of teams that have a lot of interest in O'Quinn and would love to bring him in. The Knicks would be fine moving forward with Hernan Gomez really playing the role that O'Quinn had been playing for most of the season.
Yeah, I think great points there on the Knicks, especially with Jennings. 1 year, $5 million. So again, he comes off the books this year if you take a rental on him and don't have to give up a whole lot. And again, Quinn does a lot on the defensive side of things and rebounding too. Would be very valuable to a playoff team. Maybe those Boston Celtics that you alluded to a little bit earlier. So moving on with our Twitter questions here, James Conway 912 asked us about the Mavs. Any movement there in terms of maybe the buyout of Andrew Bogut and Darren Williams and any potential moves that they may have in there coming up towards the trade deadline?
Yeah, so the Mavs are an interesting team, right? Mark Cuban has said all along, not just initially, it was what I was going to say, but all along, that they won't tank as long as they have Dirk. He won't do that to Dirk. So, at the beginning of this year, it was like, okay, well, maybe they're not trying to tank, but they certainly are. They were playing terrible. And now all of a sudden we're at the All-Star break and they're right in the mix. They're not that far out. So you can see them going either way, really. I think it becomes one of those situations where you get the right offer for Darren Williams and Andrew Bogut, sure, you'll move on from them with no real worries because the likelihood of either being there next season is not very strong. So if you can get something, why not? And then I think beyond that, they're probably going to stay and stick, and they'll push for that last playoff spot because, again, they're not going to do anything but that as long as Dirk's in a Dallas uniform.
Keith Smith joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, contributor for Real GM 16 Wins a Ring Celtics blog. Definitely catch him. I mean, he writes some really, really great pieces. His recent articles that he's dropped regarding the buyers and sellers for both the East and Western Conference respectively. All right, so as we kind of round things off for you, Keith, the Atlanta Hawks, right? I mean, this is the team that you love to be disappointed by, right? Like they seem to want to hang in there. They either overachieve or they fly under the radar. And then just when we have this glimmer of hope that they can probably knock off a team like the Cleveland Cavaliers, they just look like, like peons compared to them. And at some particular point, you keep saying to yourself, are they going to buy or sell? Because you never know. Like they're like a tale of two different teams in when it comes to how they play. Like they play like a team that really needs to be selling their pieces, and then suddenly they become a team like, they need to start buying like there's no tomorrow. So where are you on this team? What kind of moves do you think the Atlanta Hawks really should be making if the intent is that they want to make a run and a play for the Cleveland Cavaliers and Eastern Conference supremacy?
Yeah, so you qualified it with what I think they should be doing. So I would have, once they traded Kyle Korver, I thought, all right, that's it. They're breaking this down and they're going to do what Atlanta does and rebuild this on the fly and go from there. They've done that before, and I thought that was coming again. So now we're to the point where they traded Korver. Millsap was on the table. They took offers from no less than 5-6 teams. And then it turned into, we're going to hang on to him. We're going to stick with what we've got. So that becomes wait a minute, what's happening here? You just traded one of your better guys, and now you're keeping this guy. Doesn't make sense. And then they went on a huge run, right? And now they're sitting right smack in the middle of the East, and they look really good. So I think the challenge for the Hawks is going to be that they're just going to keep pushing towards being a playoff team. There's nothing that they can do realistically to try and make up ground and catch Cleveland. It's just not going to happen. They just don't have the talent on the current roster, nor do they have the pieces to go get in trade. Like they can't put together a trade that makes sense for Jimmy Butler or Paul George or anybody like that. So it's probably going to be a lot of what you see is what you get. I've heard they're looking for a bench big, and that is the extent of where they're probably going to get to for this trade deadline if they even go that far.
So last couple ones let you get out of here. At stat_line247 want to know in general, as a qualifier, just in your general opinion, which player out there that maybe we've heard of or maybe that we haven't could really benefit from a change of scenery this trade season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was running through. I actually saw that one on Twitter, and I was running through that. I don't want to go to the obvious one, but the big one is obviously Demarcus Cousins. I think getting him out of Sacramento would be massive. Getting him somewhere into a stable organization where it makes sense for him and he could really blossom and grow into a better person. and that's not to say he's a bad guy, because it sounds like all reports are off the court. He's a great guy,
but a better person on the basketball court.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not skill wise, because the skills are great, but like I said before, stop stink eyeing your teammates and treating them like general garbage out there. I think that there's a chance we could see that. And then on the other side of that, I'd like to see Lou Williams go somewhere, because at this point in his career, I don't want to see him wasting away, coming into games when the Lakers, aren't really playing for anything. I'd like to see him somewhere where he can make a difference.
He is the man. He is, constantly. I mean, he's almost sacrificing his personal life to give us the goods talk in the NBA. Our boy Keith Smith. Be sure to check him out doing his thing. You can always catch him on Real GM. He's also on 16 Wins a Ring. And you catch him on FanRag Sports, Celtics blog, anything basketball related. We're very much sure Keith Smith will have his finger and his typing and his intuitiveness all over it printed. Keith, man, we thank you so much for helping us break down a plethora of things already taking place and leading up to the NBA trade deadline, man.
Absolutely, you guys built me up a little too much there. Now I got to live up to all that.
Oh man, that's not hype, man. That's not hype, not yet. But the next time we bring you on, it might even get a little worse, man. We might.
Oh man, all right. Well,
I'm one to embellish a little bit when I big up my guests for giving us the great content, man.
If that's where we are, then I'll take it. I'll play this back for my family and friends and see, I am a big deal.
That's up, man. Hey, man, you got that blue check mark on Twitter relatively quickly. Verified dude doing big things on multiple websites. So we really appreciate your time, Keith.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right, you're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Yes, sir. The drop. I mean, what can I tell you, Shaw? That was really, really a great opportunity to have Keith Smith on board with us here, doing quality work. He's running with the 16 Wins a Ring crew. Just awesome stuff, man. Really great perspective from him regarding, what we're hoping is going to be a very, very hectic, fast-moving, and volatile pace towards the NBA trade deadline.
You're right, man. And it's great that we've linked up with 16 Wins a Ring ourselves to have access to these great contributors like Keith out there who have so much insight into the NBA. And his star has definitely risen very quickly over the last year or so. One of the first guys that I started following on Twitter about 2 years ago. Started seeing him on Drive and Dish, following his work on RealGM.com as well too. So again, this is a guy who's definitely plugged in and breaking some stuff out there. And he's gone through the hardships, bro. I know this for certain. Over the summer, he was the first one talking about the Celtics getting into some rumors over the summer, and people were questioning whether or not he knew anything, and he wasn't verified. But he's quickly dispelled any myth that he wasn't who he said he is, because he's definitely plugged into what's going on around the league.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And I encourage everyone, whenever there's an opportunity, to really check out his articles. Very well written. He doesn't fiddle around with it. He just pretty much is straight shooter, tells it to you exactly like it is. And that's what we want. We want to engage in conversation and open up the mindset, because across the landscape, this is why, we cover the NBA. It's not just for the wins and losses. It's all of the nuances in between. Now, before we get into, our segment of the drop, where we cover obviously some more opportunities of possible rumors floating around in the association, we just wanted to make sure we give a special shout out to all of the guys that helped contribute to this week's opportunity for us to interview Keith Smith. I'm sure on behalf of Keith Smith, he really appreciates the feedback and the questions that we had lined up. So shout outs to @Chris Nordby, @Nando8701, @Fluffy Sock Ninja, O Cambridge, @Statline247, @Hawk Toby, @Dabs106, @James Conway 912, and @Schroeder Goat. We really appreciate you guys taking the time out and really, sending us the questions that you wanted us to ask Keith Smith. Hopefully he's answered them to your satisfaction, but more importantly, really helping to bring about more interactivity with our show, the Baseline NBA Podcast. And I'm sure, as Shaw will allude to as well too, man, it just continues to amaze us, the kind of feedback that people are giving us with regards to the content that we give you covering the stuff that's happening in the NBA. Hello?
That was a question.
No, I was asking you to follow up on that.
I was like, oh.
I said, as Shaw will allude to.
All right.
That was your response. I was like, Oh wow, that's the quickest thank you I think I've heard from you yet, man.
Nah, all right, punch me back in. Ready?
Yeah, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
No, that's just great points, and we love getting feedback out there, and it's just amazing to have that type of response, especially when we have a great guest like that come on. But we know we love to talk NBA at all stops, whether it's on our Facebook or IG or Twitter, whatever it is. We're here to give you all the news and give you some of our takes as well too. So thanks so much everybody for participating.
All right, now with that being said, let's get right into it, baby. Let's TMZ ourselves into some NBA conversation. Let's go ahead and start talking about some of the rumors that are floating around. Now, whether or not they are confirmed or not confirmed, we're not here to start riling people up. There's a reason why they are considered rumors. There's going to come a point where we'll be able, to validate some of these things, but it does open up the possibility. And that's the beauty about what we do as well, too. We not just cover the facts, but we also like to cover the possibilities. But I don't want people going off of the deep end thinking that this is conspiracy theory type thing either. This is stuff that is on websites. Other NBA websites are covering this and looking further into it as well, too. So I don't want to take any credit for any outlandish things that may or may not happen. That's my disclaimer, and I'm sticking to it. First things first, y'all, let's talk about the Boston Celtics. There are some talks about their interest in Suns PJ Tucker and the Denver Nuggets Danilo Gallinari. Are you liking either one of these guys as being intricate pieces that can help this Boston Celtics team make that push that we've been talking about so far for this season?
Well, it's interesting because I think all the conversation regarding the Celtics has been about their ability to need to acquire a star or somebody to rim protect. And Tucker and Gallinari do neither of those things. Ainge has long since been enamored with Gallinari's shooting and his ability to play the 3 and the 4 position. And a guy who's acceptable on defense. Tucker is a plus defender and a guy who can defend basically 2 through 4, 2 3s and 4s out there. So I think on the defensive side, I think where Boston has really struggled, and that's where Tucker fits in. And I think Gallinari is just kind of scratching Ainge's itch to get him on that roster. But this team, again, they need some rim protection, they need rebounding, and neither of those guys do those two things.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a little hesitant in thinking that while depth is going to be a good thing for this team, the kind of depth that you're getting doesn't automatically produce opportunities for this basketball team to score points. Now, Danilo Gallinari, most certainly, but clearly then if you bring him in the fold, that means he's going to wind up being a starter, right? Is he the starter that you're talking about to help facilitate? And where are you going to place him? Because that means Jay Crowder goes to the bench, or that means you're going to move him to the 2. Like, I don't know where they're going, or they're going to probably move Hofford to the 5, and then that makes your lineup even smaller. Danilo is not a solid rebounder. PJ Tucker, good contributor off the bench, but the guy does not score the basketball consistently. If there's one thing that will hurt this Boston Celtics team is a propensity to score the basketball when Isaiah Thomas is off the basketball court. We don't know the health of Avery Bradley. So all across the board, while this might sound nice, it's not going to fix the issues with the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think Gallo can be that 2B score that the Celtics seem to be lacking. Horford's not giving a whole lot of points. Horford's just one of those statistical guys who does everything across the board and helps out. Gallo can be a guy who gives you 17, 18 a game like he has been doing in Denver, and that would help them offensively. But Tucker, again, is the exact opposite. He's really just going to be a guy to help them defensively. So I can see definitely lineups out there. Imagine Smart, Tucker, and depending what you have to give up for Tucker, but Smart, Tucker, and Jay Crowder out there, really bulldogging their ways. And even if Avery Bradley gets back, on defense, that could really help them on that side of the basketball. So they have a lot of different dynamics in here in play, and they're trying to make small tweaks, as our guy Keith Smith kind of alluded to. But Gallinari's contract at 16.1 as a player option next year, that's a hefty chunk that could take the Celtics out of the running for some top free agents that are out there. Tucker's an expiring deal, so and it's a lesser move if they were to do that. But like I said earlier, I just don't like either one of these moves dramatically. Tucker, I can see maybe a little bit more than Gallinari, though.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing, Shaw. Whenever you hear draft picks, and to Keith's point, as he said earlier, that a lot of GMs, a lot of executives and scouts are really enamored with this upcoming draft class and the draft class for the following year. So now any team that has, comparable draft picks, they're always, it's like the wolves sniffing food, okay? So they're completely dangling out there these old veteran-like type players have been around the league. They're not obviously old, as dirt, you know what I'm saying? But clearly they're not Vince Carter old, but clearly they're old enough and they're seasoned enough that they may talk about, well, we'll move him and the big contract if you give us some kind of a draft pick. And I think if you're the Celtics, don't be duped by that. Now, what's interesting, we talked about PJ Tucker, and clearly the Phoenix Suns have players that they can, quote unquote, like our man Smokey say, shop around. And Tyson Chandler's name has been thrown out there along with Brandon Knights. What surprises me more than anything, Shaw, is that if you're the Boston Celtics and you have an opportunity to get a Tyson Chandler, I'm not saying that Tyson Chandler is going to fix your problems, but he definitely is going to add something that the Celtics lack on that front court. Why his name is not being associated with the Celtics' interest, I have no idea.
Well, I think with Chandler, it's just the years that's left on his deal. He's a veteran guy, very great locker room dude as well, rebounder, shot blocker, everything Boston needs. But he's also owed 2 more years on his deal at roughly $26 million over the next 2 seasons. So I think that's where they're a little bit concerned. But $13 million in today's NBA really isn't a huge chunk of the cap, especially if it's going to continue to rise. And you're right. I think that's somebody who would more fit along with Boston's needs. And I think he was linked to Portland before they made this deal to get Nurkic over there as well too, because they're a team that definitely needs rebounding and rim protection. You really would be wondering where else he could potentially go and who's willing to take on his salary. Again, it's not unmanageable for some teams, but a lot of people can use his locker room presence. I think even a team like Houston would really be a nice fit for him too, especially, he's still a lob guy, alley-oop guy. Harden would be great to get him the ball sometimes. No rumors to that at all so far as we move toward the trade deadline. But again, I like Tyson Chandler a lot. What he'd be able to do for a lot of people in their locker room.
All right, let's go ahead and fly our little jet planes over to Washington. Washington's been the big talk of the town over the last couple of weeks, Shaw. We had them crack our Power 5, obviously, because they've been playing hellacious basketball. They're among the top teams in the Eastern Conference. And now that there's talk that they may be interested in a guy like Lou Williams out of the Los Angeles camp and Bojan Bogdanovic, excuse me, I didn't pronounce that properly, from the Brooklyn Nets. Now, both of those guys are solid players, solid scorers. Clearly, the writing on the wall is the Wizards are not scoring enough that they think that they can compete with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Do you like that assessment?
Well, I think it goes back to even what we talked about in our last show with Julie. They need some guard help. And I know you're on the contrary on that in terms of that you think the Wizards would be better off getting some front court help there too. But it's just not sexy to be having Trey Burke run around out there behind John Wall and Marcus Thornton and players like that.
After watching that last game as Trey Burke, you know what I'm saying? Trey Burke was Trey Blah. Okay.
Yeah, Trigger Trey. No, that's not who he is at all.
Trey, that's what that was. Okay.
I'm leaving it.
His game was ashtray. All right. I'm calling it as I see it, man, because this guy really coming out of Michigan, I had high hopes for this guy to really play good basketball, and he just hasn't. Don't give me this crap about him being in Utah. Like, I'm not buying it. If there was ever an opportunity for him to take his game to a level and to really kind of make a name for himself, was in Utah, especially after what happened to Darren Williams, and he's just never lived up to that hype.
Yeah, and he's really struggled defensively, hasn't been the playmaker that a lot of people thought he'd turn into, and that really has become a problem for him during his NBA career. And that's why a guy like Lou Williams now, and he's, as you mentioned, Bogdanovic come in, those guys can obviously knock down the three, which Washington is doing at the best rate that they've done, under the Wall era, if you will. Williams can come in there, even do some ball handling as well too, when he's so inclined. And I think this Wizards team would be very, very good, better off if they were able to get one of those two guys in the uniform.
I couldn't agree with you more. If you're going to sell me on the idea that they need better backcourt help and it's someone like a Lou Williams that they're targeting more so, then I think the idea of a Ricky Rubio and a couple other guys, and no disrespect to Julius, because she really gave great insight. So I think on that particular context, I'm on board with the idea that if there's a way for them to bolster up their backcourt, especially to relieve the minutes that they've got throwing out Beal and throwing out Wall, and clearly you're being conscious of having Beal not get injured again towards the end of the season to make a serious run. Getting a Lou Williams who can play the 1-2 position with versatility, I think is an excellent choice. On top of that, I think it's an even just as excellent choice if you go after a Bogdanovic, because number one, he's a seasoned veteran. You can clearly see that he can play the NBA game as well as the international game, which means he shoots the three. He's not as bad a defensive player, but I don't think you're calling upon him to be a defensive stopper for the Wizards. They want people to score off the bench, and I think you get that with a Bogdanovic. I don't know where Kelly Oubre is going to fall in line, but I think it definitely bolsters your second unit having a guy like that. Now, with that being said, Shaw, as we transition ourselves from a Bogdanovic and the Brooklyn Nets, there's one big major piece that we keep saying we don't know what's going on with this guy, why he still stays in Brooklyn. Clearly, it must be, you know what I'm saying, for the empanadas or for something, but other than playing basketball, what are the Nets going to do with Brook Lopez? I mean, this is a guy who never seems to get any kind of love from any other NBA organization, and yet he's still dropping 25 points per game. When are they going to actually recognize that this guy can play?
I mean, they know what it is. They know Lopez is a guy who's transcended his game a little bit, especially this year. You know, he's making, almost 2 threes a game right now, shooting like 6 threes and knocking it down at a great clip. I think Lopez really has understood how to maneuver through today's NBA, and he can't be the plotting big that he came into the league as. Shooting the ball, still has a great jump hook, is a great free throw shooter as well. Acceptable passer is definitely, that's something that he's worked on since he first got into the league. And he can really help some teams out there. The problem with Brooklyn and Brook Lopez is that their asking price was absurd. You know, they wanted multiple first rounders. You know, if you're trying to get Brook Lopez at his age and then with his injury history, you're not going to get 2 first round picks from most teams. You know, and again, I think there's a lot of this trying to make up for what Billy King did. They have to really let that go and be acceptable. Report came out as we were on air talking about Cousins. Listen, if Cousins is on the market, then you know that you can't be having Brook Lopez at the same asking price that Cousins would be. Like, that doesn't even make any sense. So report has already come out from Hoops Critic that says Lopez's asking price has now gone down. Now, again, whether Cousins is on the market or not, we'll still find out by Thursday's deadline. But I think if you offer a first and maybe a future picks and a couple players here there to get the salaries matched up, then Lopez can finally get out of Brooklyn.
I know this sounds really crazy, Shaw. Now, all right, let me stop. Let me dial this back a moment. Now the Cowspiracy theory thing kind of kicks in a little bit. I'm just thinking crazy here. Maybe it could be saying to someone else who might be listening to the show, might think along lines my way of thinking, although I think we're in the very, very minute population. But you know how we're talking about if there is a Boogie Cousins trade to be made, and it's probably going to be something where it may involve a third team. Why not the Brooklyn Nets? Why not the possibility of sending Brook Lopez out to Sacramento? Right? I mean, think about it. Brook Lopez, Stanford, California product, really likable guy, and is still a legitimate basketball player. I think surrounding a good team around him, the Sacramento Kings can still be a relevant basketball team. I mean, you got to look at the face the facts. If you're not going to build a team that's going to be as good as what the Golden State Warriors have, you're not going to win that division. But what you can do is put yourself in a position to be contending in the playoffs every single year. And if you're not going to be confident in doing that with a Boogie Cousins, tell me you can't do that with the Brook Lopez. Look at what he's been trying to do with the Brooklyn Nets for so long.
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting point. So you're saying you're posing out there New Orleans, Sacramento, and Brooklyn getting in a deal where, if I can make sure I hash this out here, where New Orleans would get Cousins, right? And if they're offering 2 first round picks, one of those picks would have to go to Brooklyn, and one would go to Sacramento, and then Sacramento would also get Lopez. So they get Lopez and a first rounder, and Brooklyn would just get a first rounder. See, there have to be more players involved.
It would have to be. No, clearly, there would have to be. But what I'm saying is,
I see the framework.
Yeah, right, exactly. What I'm thinking about is a little bit outside of just the realm of basketball. There is a business in this sport, okay? Now, I'm not saying that the business is supposed to supersede the quality and the product and winning basketball games, but you'd be hard-pressed for me to not think that when you measure up the numbers of what Brook Lopez has been doing for the Brooklyn Nets for this many years, that he still could not be able to do that out there in Sacramento. And he is, again, a person that people in Sacramento can gravitate to because he is from the California area.
Yeah, I get it. I think if you could maybe sweeten the deal to some degree, depending on how much you like it.
There's a lot of beignets that got to be thrown in it to make that deal sweet, Shaw. But I'm just saying.
Depending if you like Rudy Gay or not, maybe you throw Rudy Gay over to Brooklyn as well too. Yes, he has a player option, so if he does opt in, then you have a year to maybe convince him. You know he's hurt. He's going to take a full year to come back from his injury. But then he goes over there in that Brooklyn deal with a first rounder as well. Maybe something Brooklyn would be interested in.
And I don't think Brooklyn Nets fans would be completely objective to that, considering the fact that he is a Connecticut byproduct. He's played it. He's played down there, you know what I'm saying, in the area. If you were to send him to Brooklyn, he may actually like the idea. And here's another thing too. Rudy Gay, I know at some particular point, has obviously been thinking about his brand and his marketability. And he has seen the likes of those that out of his draft class are getting over a lot more than he has. And I think that he wants to kind of wash himself of that stigma of not being that guy. And there are only so many places you can get away with doing this in the market and the way that the NBA has been trending over the last couple of years, especially with the increase in the cap. Whatever happens to Rudy Gay, this might be the last good deal he'll ever find himself in. So whatever it's going to be a team in which his game can translate to something that allows his brand to equate to. You get what I mean?
I do. And again, listen, I think a lot has been made about Rudy Gay and him being inefficient and all those things. I think the last 2 or 3 seasons, he's really acquitted himself of some of those issues. So I want to see him in the right situation. It really is going to be just dependent on whether or not he wants to opt in and where he chooses to play basketball. If he opts in, then, if Sacramento doesn't move him, then, that's where he is and he tries to get his way back. Or he can still opt out, work his way back and come back sometime in the middle of next year and have a whole option of places where he wants to go, depending on what happens by the trade deadline.
Most definitely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This is The Drop, as we're going over some of the rumors that have been floating around in the association leading up to the NBA trade deadline. A few more to get through to, Shaw. All right, so the Los Angeles Clippers, highs and lows this year, among one of the best teams defensively, and then have basically become one of the worst teams at one point defensively almost. I mean, it's like night and day with these guys. And just, again, the rash of injuries have certainly plagued this team. If you'd be sadly mistaken to not think that this team can still add more player depth if they expect to compete with what has now increasingly become a top-heavy Western Conference, and the LA Clippers are going to be on a collision course. Now, along with them, the Oklahoma City Thunder. To Keith Smith's article about buyers and sellers, clearly Presti is making a play for the Thunder to buy. He clearly sees that while Westbrook is having an historic season right now and is in a running for MVP, this is still about the future, especially him signing that extension. He has to do something in the immediate now to surround him with the kind of talent that's going to give Westbrook an excuse to say, I still want to play for the OKC Thunder. And right now, all eyes are on Wilson Chandler out of the Denver Nuggets.
Yeah, Chandler's a guy who can score, man. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And having a great season started off, especially this year, really on fire, coming off that bench and then coming back from an injury from a season ago and playing great basketball. Probably the best basketball of his NBA career, 15.6 points per game, shooting 74% from the free throw line, not amazing, but, decent enough, almost 7 rebounds a game, and shooting great percentage from the 3-point line too, 34%, which is, one of the third highest best of his career. Chandler is a guy who plays the 3, plays the 4 position, can play the 2, and I guess if you're trying to play a bigger lineup out there as well too, and just does what he needs to do on a regular basis. Just 29 years old, affordable deal, $12 million for the next 3 years, if you will. So I don't see Wilson Chandler really fitting in Denver as much as he could really help a team like the LA Clippers or the OKC Thunder.
All right, now let's go ahead and shift our focus and gear, Shaw, to Indiana. And we have a little bit of time for us to kind of embellish on this thought process, because just before we started recording this show, my point to this is the Indiana Pacers, and this is interesting because Keith Smith, and we didn't get a chance to get him to kind of talk about this, but Keith Smith, in his buyers and sellers at the trade deadline, he has the Indiana Pacers at neutral, right? They are Swiss in his expectations about the Pacers doing something for this upcoming season. With that being said, right, there's been rumors about the Pacers offering first rounders to get help for Paul George. So that means that these dudes are buyers and they're willing to auction their possible future at the expense of doing whatever's necessary to keep Paul George. My question to you, Shaw, and more so something to probe, is this predicated on Paul George's uneasiness to commit to the Indiana Pacers?
Yeah, you're 100% correct there. With Paul George being non-committal and saying some really questionable things throughout the NBA season about the team and the roster and his future and all of those things, I don't know that the Pacers are 100% confident, that they're just going to be able to re-sign him. We've had some conversation about, the desert player exemption for him, whether or not he'd get that super max deal. He has to meet some qualifiers this season in order to be eligible for it. But I think right now they're trying to show some sort of commitment, perhaps. And they would offer some first first round picks if it were able to land them a star. To pair him alongside even Miles Turner, who I think is going to be a budding star, and really try to help get them some help, probably at that 2 guard position, I think where they're most concerned. Jeff Teague is up, for a renewal of his contract. All indications are with him being from the area that they'll be able to bring him back, but they definitely need some help at the 2, and maybe make an argument to not maybe, you can definitely make an argument they need some help in the front court behind Miles Turner too. So to see this Pacers team making some strides, if you will, to kind of probe the market and see if they can get somebody there, that goes to show you that they are a little bit uneasy, because then, as you've kind of alluded to, they could very well then switch gears. If they're unable to do so, would they then entertain a trade of Paul George to another destination?
Yeah, and I think it also kind of, this is why I hope that we're able to get our man Keith Smith on board again at some particular point, probably post-trade deadline, because to me, in my mindset, I'm wondering if he has a sentiment within himself that believes that the Indiana Pacers, because of the fact that Paul George might not be committal to the Pacers, that their intent is they should stand pat to start moving and completely break up this team that just a few years ago found themselves playing in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Miami Heat.
Yeah, I mean, and that seems like such a long time ago, really.
Right. It almost seems like forever when it's only been like 2 years.
Right. I mean, no, Roy Hibbert's gone. Lance will make him dance. He's gone. This team has really gone. The Vogel is gone as well too.
I mean, David West is on Social Security with the Golden State Warriors right now because I mean, we make him out to be so old, especially when he only played 1 year with the San Antonio Spurs. So it's just like it's completely nuts to me, man.
Yeah, I am concerned. I mean, I thought the moves they made were decent, but I just wasn't as sold on this team coming into the season. Everyone was like, oh, this is going to be a 50-55 win team. And I said, listen, I thought they might get to that, and they still have a chance if they get hot, but they're roughly barely above 500 right now at the All-Star break, and I just didn't see what everybody else saw on this team. I love Thaddeus Young and his ability to kind of defend and do different things. They understand that Monta Ellis can no longer be a starter, and he's doing a decent job coming off the bench. Al Jefferson at $10 million a year is a nice buy for them as a bench scorer, but the pieces just don't necessarily fit. I think a lot of that has to do with Nate McMillan as well too. I'm going to continue to harp on that, and they're going to have to figure out a way to get like Glenn Robinson III some more minutes at that 2 guard position. Rodney Stuckey's aging. It's just the pieces are very, very mismatched for me for this Pacers team, and again, a lot is in flux for them, and especially if Paul George is non-committal, then you may see this blow all the way up coming into next season.
All right, y'all, let's go ahead and round things off very nicely. The Orlando Magic. It's interesting for us. We've talked about this team, so many talented pieces. And slowly but surely now we're starting to see an erosion taking place within their roster and personnel because there's now too many trade rumors floating around. They've already moved Victor Oladipo. I don't know how many times we've been talking about Vucevic being traded, right? Serge Ibaka doesn't even stay a season for the Orlando Magic and has already moved out to the Toronto Raptors. What are we talking about here? Are the Orlando Magic cleaning house between Vucevic, Fournier, Payton, Augustin, Green, and now the possibility, even Mario Hezonja, your boy. I mean, everyone sounds like they're fair game in Orlando, bro.
Yeah, I think they are. I think the only person who's pretty much not been mentioned is Aaron Gordon, who I don't know if they want to say build around, but they seem to be happy with his development and trading Ibaka to open up the 4 positions so that Gordon can go out there and really play his natural position. And really, hopefully he can get there and be a plus contributor to this Orlando Magic franchise. But everybody else is up for debate and could potentially be moved. Biyombo just signed there. He's got 3 years left on that deal after this season, roughly $17-18 million. Evan Fournier, they re-signed $17 million per. They'd be interested in moving him. They're just not happy with Elfrid Payton, who I think has done okay considering he's been jerked around being a starter, not being a starter. And yeah, we know his problem shooting and things of that nature, but I think he's done okay as a rookie and still trying to figure out his way through the NBA. And my guy Hezonja, I don't think he's gotten a fair shot at all. And if I'm a team out there, yeah, you're going to probably lowball him. He was the number 5 pick in the NBA draft, but Orlando's still trying to hold him at a little bit of a higher ransom because exactly he was that at number 5. They don't want to just give him away, but they don't seem to have much use for him. This Orlando Magic team under Rob Hennigan has underachieved greatly. Frank Vogel being the coach there, it hasn't worked out. Again, it's only been half a year thus far, but there seems to be a lot in the flux with this team. And if I'm a team also that needs a big man, I'm calling on Nick Vucevic. I like that guy. He can score from the outside, pick and pop. He can rebound. Not a great shot blocker, not even a great defender in general, but really an offensive big man at just $12.2 million over the next 2 seasons each, so roughly $24 million. Again, I'd be all in on that, and I'd give up a first round pick, maybe not a Brooklyn pick on the Celtics, but I'd definitely give up a first rounder for Vucevic.
It's just sad, man, that we're talking about all of these players for the Orlando Magic, and there's no flow. And when there's no flow, there's really, there's no plan in place, and that to me, I think is where it becomes dicey, because if you move any one of these particular guys, it still raises the question, what is left? And what do you make of what it is that you have? So,
what do they want to do?
Yeah,
we don't know what they want to do.
Exactly. I think it all goes back to when they did get Vucevic. And I think we said this from Jump Street, Shaw. Like, I understand why they did it, the circumstances because of Dwight Howard, but I still don't understand. I just felt like if the intent is that you were planning to move on from Dwight Howard, and I guess to me it's this whole mantra of, well, we're going to try and get somebody to do what Howard did. And so you get a guy, a quality guy. Vucevic was never going to be a Dwight Howard, right? But you get him, you put him in that position, and it's almost like you set those expectations that he's going to be that dude that you're building around, and then everything you do after that just completely undermines it. And he's been kind of trying to pick up from that whole situation since. And now you got like this this craziness of a team where there's a lot of talent that you can throw up there, but where the results going to be yielded from. Shaw, I got to tell you, man, it's going to be really interesting to see what the Orlando Magic does, because no one move is going to alleviate all of this. And again, I think a lot of it lends to what the organization is not allowing or preventing. I often talk about how certain organizations don't do a good enough job to keep certain things under wraps so that they kind of fall in line with wherever you are trying to go, even if you're trying to hold people back from understanding what your vision is going to be a year or 2 years from now. The fact now that all of these players are fair game also creeps into the mind of the players. And it doesn't matter whether or not they're getting paid or not paid. It matters on how they play next to the guy that plays for them. And it just makes it very difficult if the Orlando Magic roster is up for sale to the highest bidder. Absolutely astonishing. So we have to monitor those events moving forward. All right, Shaw. So there you have it, man. What a hell of a night, man. I mean, first we walked in just getting ready to just discuss some of the trade possibilities, and then all of a sudden we get landed this bombshell of a move that's being made. And I think it's still resonating even as we speak through Twitter and all of our outlets, what the implications and the impact of this trade is going to do. But more importantly, I think it's going to have a ripple effect on how we look at each and every single scenario and team now, about the aggressiveness and passiveness that some of these teams may exhibit by the time that this trade deadline takes place.
Well, it all just goes to prove that nothing can't get done. We said years ago that Joe Johnson's contract was unmovable. Then it got moved. Then you talk about, franchise players, all-stars, oh, no one's going to make that deal. Then they get moved. And you see evidence here when an organization does a complete about-face in terms of dealing their franchise guy. So I think you're right. This definitely sets the table for an active trade deadline. Teams are going to be jockeying really to try to figure out, okay, where do they stand? How can they move up and make a true run at this thing? As I think that the landscape, especially in the Eastern Conference, seems to be a little bit more wide open, but things are definitely moving and shaking out in the Western Conference as well.
Yeah, man, it's just amazing how everything has kind of played itself out. And look, I give all the credit to Debs and the organization. They're clearly trying to make a play, and I think that they understand the writing on the wall. They cannot afford to lose a star like Anthony Davis, and we don't know what this is going to mean for Boogie Cousins come next year, but certainly the Pelicans have the inside track on being able to maintain what could very well be one of the most dominant front courts that we'll probably see in NBA history if these guys post the kind of numbers equally together on the same team.
Well, you know what? And even outside of that, shout out to the Kings for taking the Knicks out of the headlines. You know what I mean? Because, the last 2 weeks have been...
Yet again, we talked about how the Knicks were absolutely the worst franchise that you can really think of right now during this modern NBA era, and the way that they handle things. And listen, the Kings certainly have outdone themselves. If there's ever a night tonight for us to start passing the torch, the Kings found a way to wear the crown very handsomely.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's going to be a poll on Twitter as we move through. Which organization would you least like to work for? would you at least want to work for New York or Sacramento at this point? Because they're both in a dumpster fire that doesn't seem to be getting better anytime soon. And at least New York still has Carmelo, I guess, if whatever you want to call that. But to lose, again, a guy who's the best center in the NBA, a top 10 NBA player without question. Yes, he has his issues. It said this is very, very tough for Sacramento fans to swallow.
Yeah, tough to swallow, tough to digest, tough to sleep. If anything else, there's going to be a lot of King fan insomniacs out there, and it's just not going to get any easier for them.
But some people are happy though. Right. Some people are happy to get him out of town.
Well, yeah, I saw some very interesting tweets, even from a few people on air announcers who are stating fact. Yeah, like who's basically stating fact that he was a cancer to the locker room and that players, his own teammates didn't care for him and didn't like him. But listen, this got nothing to do with that, right? I mean, we deal with that right now. With the division of the division right now between people who like and can't stand Donald Trump, our own president of the United States. What does that have to do with the welfare of your organization and your fan base? And there's some things that you do and some things that you don't do without having a plan. And this to me is a clear indication that the Kings executed this without having a plan. And right. It's an unfortunate circumstance because once again, it has nothing to do with the product of the NBA. The NBA is going to be all right. The New Orleans Pelicans are going to be all right. Who ain't going to be all right are the Sacramento Kings fans. Again.
Listen, the deal continues to get worse, and I know we got to sign off here, but stuff continues to come in. The Pelicans pick going to Sacramento is also top 3 protected. So I don't know what the hell Sacramento is thinking in making a deal for Cousins and then having protections on the pick that they're getting back in this year. So let's say New Orleans does not make the playoffs this year and they get lucky to get into the lottery. They could, if they somehow luck up and end up with the top 3 pick, they'll end up with that. They can get Lorenzo Ball or whatever his name is and end up with Demarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis on their roster. How Dell Demps ripped Vlade Divac here doesn't make any sense. Top 3 protection for Demarcus Cousins is absurd. I'm done, man. Let's sign off.
It's a wrap. It's a wrap. Once again, we'd like to thank our man Keith Smith for hopping on board with us earlier on tonight to help us break down a lot of the trade implications that might take place between now and the deadline. We'd like to thank you and yours once again. What an awesome show. Obviously, we are going to be on it. Be sure to check out the Baseline NBA podcast. And I'll also encourage you guys to go to 16 Windsor Ring website. If you don't think that we are not going to expound on what is taking place, you definitely need to make sure that you're checking with our peoples from 16 Windsor Ring. They are going to be on it. Great NBA writers, great content, and definite analysis with regards to what is taking place and the fallout that will happen thereafter. For the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.